Cool. So today I'm gonna talk about Linux. I'm gonna do a little bit of a different presentation than I would normally do. I will be doing a different presentation than any same person would do. This is all of me. My name is Aleix. I am from Barcelona. I'm living in Berlin. I am living in Berlin because I went to work for MBition to put Kitty software on and Wayland things on Mercedes cars. But I've been doing Kitty stuff for ages, and I am also the KittyV president. Now, normally when or like I said, same people would do a presentations, they say, well, I'm doing this presentation from this perspective. What I'm gonna try and do today, and maybe I will succeed, is to like sandwich all of these personas into one presentation and try to give you well, somewhat of a combined experience of how everything feels from the different perspectives. From the perspective of well, doing a KD developer and seeing your software being adopted by another company and how they adopt it, from the perspective of being an integrator of free software in these companies and seeing what kind of practices are useful to be done, are useful when they're done by an open source project, and then the perspective of being in the KDV, being a person in general in the community that tries to think how we can do our products a little bit better and a little bit more smart, and well, seeing which things works on either side, right? Let's see. Maybe it will be chaos. Maybe it will be interesting for everyone, or just probably a little bit of both, like everything is in life, right? So on the title, I was talking about embedded Linux. Embedded Linux is something that I had been, and I imagine that all of you who have not been working on it professionally, you've seen the term being used. And it does feel a bit diluted, and you know and understand all of the technologies that are part of it, but they're clearly being used in a different way than we normally do. This is the definition that WindRiver.com gives, WindRiver being one of the companies that have been doing embedded Linux since forever. So I thought, let's go with this one because they did it, right? Like, when embedded has been presented to me in the past, people tell me about, no, it's about systems that have not a lot of memory, or it's about systems that, I don't know, they're smaller, right? But like none of these are actual things that define a system that would say you need to work differently, or you would need to make an operating system in a different way. And even when WindRiver, who are people who sell themselves as creators of embedded Linux devices, like the definition they give is also kind of sparse, right? Like they talk about, well, using the same Linux kernel, but they want higher reliability, they want security, tighter resource availability, right? Like none of these things are super specific about any embedded device. And even if we think about embedded devices, like for example, when embedded maybe started to appear in the KDE spheres, when like smartphones started to be a thing, and like they were already not that different from what we have on a laptop. And like, for example, what we do in Mercedes, like the computer that you have on those cars is not all that far off from this laptop or any smartphone. So like, we are not on the crux. But on the other hand, like how these products are being created is very, very vastly different from how we do it in communities and like the traditional like desktop and probably even server Linuxes, how they're created, if we exclude the whole container part. So we, as KDE, we do care about all of those things, right? Like we care about security, of course we do. We care about resources. Do we not care about resources as much as an embedded device? It will definitely depend on the hardware, but like resources have been a big thing for us. And for example, when we like PinePhone came to us and they told us, let's put together a device that works. Well, we did have, we were able to put a lot of effort in resources that actually like had a very big impact on the rest of our products, right? So we do care about that, and that's for sure. Reliability, I think that it's obvious that we want to be reliable, and every piece of software will want to be reliable in general. maybe not by the same measures that some of them will, but again, it's not something that is like a yes or no kind of question. And availability, well, same thing, right? So that is kind of why I call it a lie, right? Like, it is a lie because they're not doing something really different. Maybe actually like the branding of embedded Linux is created to like be able to have your salespeople go to the different clients and explain how they want to do things different. And that is because it's a useful lie, right? When an embedded engineer goes into a project and looks at it, what they want to effectively make sure that always happens is that the person who's using this device gets to do what they want to do. The use cases will normally be probably more narrow, but creating the thing that I think that just works. Maybe right now you can be thinking, this is also what we do, but those of you who are developing KDNs, you also know that this is not, right? Like we have a lot of decoration and things around how we work that are not only about how making things just work. For example, we don't release things every day, right? Like if we want the thing to always just work, every time we do a bug fix, we would get that bug fix into our users' devices, right? This is not how it happens. There's good reasons why it happens. There's good reasons why we don't want it to happen every day. It wouldn't be convenient. It also probably doesn't make all that sense. But this is kind of the difference. And this is normally done by allowing whatever person is doing this integration to just fork and license the not license, fork and adapt the software to the use case of like that device, like let's say this little display or where this phone. If you have decided that it needs to always just work, you will do whatever to the software that you're shipping in there to make it work, just work, right? Which is gonna be a bit of a contraposition of how we normally work because we also are trying to make things work all the time, right? This leads me to think that maybe on the other side of things, we've been complicating a little bit our story. And I am very well understanding that I am not the only person kind of talking about this topic right here. Harald talked about this proof of concept of operating system that he's suggesting we do yesterday. It's very much aligned with what I'm talking about here. I think David, I didn't see his presentation, but also was talking about this topic quite a bit. But in practice, we've definitely complicated the story, right? Like it hasn't been just us delivering to our users. We've had a whole mechanism that is complex, and it is complex also for certain reasons that is put between whoever is doing that bug fix and whoever is leveraging that bug fix, but has made it so that this bug fix that whoever wrote is not yet on your computer. How this ends up happening is by shifting somewhat the responsibility of the stability of your system to the user, and we end up doing that by creating a big dependency tree. We do that by telling them you can update whenever we do that by different ways, but it's about shifting this responsibility of like who is responsible for making sure that the product works. On an embedded product, it would be always the manufacturer, and the manufacturer will be like insisting you on getting everything up to date. And the more distance you have with your user, the more flexible you will be with this kind of definitions. No? Another thing that is very important is that in practice, we don't have a lot of information about how software ends up being used, right? An embedded developer, again, will be thinking of very specific use case, and then that's why they have this or they take this license to modify and adapt the software they create. They think that they fully understand their use case, and they go all the way with it, which is something that, on the other hand, KDE, we have proudly not really done in the past. We've been while trying to make everything super configurable, and we've been trying to make everything adaptable to the different use cases and like Linux distributions and all of that. And maybe that's probably one of the differences between us and these embedded integrators. So what I wanted to talk about today a little bit would be how can we better serve these industry partners. So if other projects want to come and work with our software, how we can make it so that we can work together better. What can we learn from maybe my experience and the experience from the people who do this kind of projects, and which strategies we can adopt as KDE that will better serve KDE, right? Like if we have more of these people contributing patches, for example, we will improve because, and to be super clear, having people using our software doesn't improve anything. It just, well, it's a happy thing. Maybe somebody will get a job, but that doesn't improve anything. Things start improving when you start getting the patches, you start getting bug fixes, or you start having some kind of conversation, right? And there are certainly some things that we can do, or that I think that could be interesting. That yeah. So as is, and like the first thing that normal embedded developer will do is, when something doesn't go their way, we'll start to patch your thing. And maybe it is obvious, but what I want to convince you all today is that this is a bad thing. Like the moment that they patch your code, everything will start to become more complex for them. For example, they will have a harder time at updating to your next version. They will have less incentive to create patches for your software, because when you release your software with the patches that they created, they won't be able to rebase it because they had other patches, and it all becomes a super complex story. So if we make our software, maybe here I would have in mind more Queen, which is what we've been working on mostly, but not exclusively, like also a ton of frameworks. If you create the software in ways that are easily extensible without modifying, so let's say adding plugins, adding what things that happen around, having other processes that modify the behavior of the system in general, then you have the opportunity of telling them, you make your configuration, your special thing over there outside, and then you keep somewhat clean Queen or whatever project we're talking about, and the maintainership of that will be easy. The maintainership of your own modules, you get to do that because they're your own. You don't even need to do the whole engineering of patches, which is a pain in the ass, and I don't think anyone wants to do that. And well, these are being done with all of your software if you have any free software in the open, right? Another thing that is very important is this encouraging of working upstream. A lot of the embedded developers might not even be like open source people. Like there's a lot of open source people working on Linux and actual open source software that, I don't know, they don't have the drive to go to academy every year or to join regular communities, right? But encouraging, explaining, and doing all of this work, it needs to happen, because well, that's how we collectively win. And like there's objective reasons. It's not about, at this point, moral or ethical reasons, like software should be ethical or open. It's about like, we're all engineers solving complex problems. Let's make sure that we have one source of truth that is where well, where you actually, they all got the software originally from, right? And like, even if they do everything correctly, it will happen that they will be using old versions of the software. We do see that in the normal, non-that embedded Linux normally, right? That people on like in their offices, in their stuff, they have weird old versions of random software because somebody decided that upgrading it was a bad idea. And this is bad. This is bad because like it's less incentive for everybody to upgrade things. But well, I guess we need to be still mindful of it. I still gave it a thumbs down because of. On the other hand, since we know that we need to be mindful about compatibility, right? So if we create new interfaces or if we modify interfaces, if we keep, for example, source compatibility on a lot of things, it's very useful because you don't need to like the maintainership remains low. If things when change, they get documented. Well, you have something to sit onto. I know that a lot of the like rebasing work I've done in Quinn, for example, if I hadn't been so involved with like the KDE part of the development, it would have been very hard for me to like follow and like do. And actually, like even in this case, we're carrying like huge patches that, well, when we release, we will need to keep in the open because Queen is open source, right? Well, it's GPL, so it's part of the license. You will see that they are like pretty hefty patches. So making sure that we explain what the changes are and what the compatibility looks and tries to be is important. And if, for example, like I was saying before, if things become plugins, well, make sure that these interfaces are reasonably stable, right? That's something you can always do. Like these cosmetic changes in code go a little bit against the spirit of what I'm talking about. And I was talking about before about how they won't be that familiar with our mindset, but also it's like I said, they won't be following the planet every day. They won't be following like our matrix channels every day. So it's not really about documenting things. I think that very often, or more often than not, if we can simply make just things simpler, I think that it serves us all collectively better. And I do think that we've, in KDE, not always valued simplicity as much as we could have. So I don't know, maybe if it's something that we can keep in mind when taking decisions, it's something that in the future it will serve us well. I was talking about plugins before, and in the Qt and C++ world, this normally means ABIs and like actual like shared objects that get loaded. These are also like a bit harder and more tightly coupled. Like you're already talking about C++ headers. It actually means that all of these extensions need to be implemented in C++, for example, when like companies and increasingly actually like C and C++ interfaces are becoming less and less standard, right? So because people like to use Rust and Go and I don't know, Dart, what's it called, Flutter. So making things, if things can happen in different processes, it means that, for example, you can implement it in any kind of technology and you're like less tightly bound in this kind of way. It also means that, for example, you can consider sandbox all of these processes, which actually it's something that we could leverage ourselves. In fact, like in KDE, we do have a problem with that, right? Like right now, we need to have all of our plasmoids in Plasma Shell in the same process, and all of the QML plugins need to be specified in a certain ABI. And I don't know, I think that it's pretty clear. Like when you're starting Plasma Shell, like a lot of what's happening there is a lot of like QML things that maybe could happen in other processes, and we could parallelize more. A lot of the blocking that happens, for example, is in dbus, right? I'm getting ahead of myself, but what I just was meaning to say here is the more we can move into separate processes, the more like we can keep things separate, the more powerful we all collectively become as well that way. Something that is sad, but also not entirely sad, is that organization will decide to use open source technologies because they don't really care that much about it, right? Like if a big organization decides to use a piece of open source software, is because they want to build something on top of it. It's not because they say, now we're going to put a huge team here to work on it. And like, this is bad because it means you are not going to have a whole lot of development. It also is good, I would say, because it means like they're not normally going to like come and like disturb you all of your the chickens in your community, because, well, they're building on top of it. So making sure that they can contribute, I think, the patches on top, making sure that there's a good communication and relationship, inviting them to things like the advisory board also is useful. I think that this is something to keep in mind as well. But normally, like, if they decided that they really care about one of such technologies, what I imagine, or what I've seen happening in general, and I'm not even talking about Mercedes here, is like they just created themselves, right? Like, how hard can it be? But it's also important, I think, that for our technology in general, that organizations are using it, right? Like, it's probably tempting to say, yeah, asterisk it, no need to care about other people outside using it. But it's important that the world outside of ours is using our products and making sure that it's reliable and it can be ported to different ways. Like, a lot of the work I've been able to do upstream in Queen, for example, wouldn't have been able to, or wouldn't have happened if I hadn't done it because of them. And not only that, right? Like, when I was in Blue Systems and we were working with Valve, and when they are working with Valve, they also get to work on things that, if they didn't have Valve behind saying, this is important, this is important, this is important, wouldn't happen. And I am sure that if you talk to anyone who has been working on one of these projects, they will be able to tell you that they have done fixes, they have done optimizations, features that they wouldn't have worked on if it wasn't for one of these clients, and it has been for the best of the community and of open source in general. In KDE, we do a lot of testing for sure. It's also done largely in the context of a community, but also, like, for example, if I see like the amount of money and involvement that there is with testing, for example, in Mercedes, and again, other deployments, maybe Valve, it's on a whole different level as well. So that's also a good reason to make sure that these organizations use you, right? They will have like big, I don't want to say farms, but like groups of people whose job is to like touch the UI to make sure that things pop, and they will find you issues with, like, I don't know, lib input when you press every 2 seconds and you don't know what's happening, right? So yeah, like, we KDE are not here to sell this industry, and that's perfectly fine to say, but we're not that different. Like, we are all sitting on the same kind of hardware. We're trying to like take what we have today and bring it to products into the that go in the future, and the things we end up needing are not that different. Like, we need to keep adding different features, and we need to support them over time and make sure that like this over time is an easy thing to happen, right? And also, on the other hand, it's not that like we're doing the same things, but it's important that when things get done, they get done on the technologies that we're on, because otherwise, like, they're fixing other people's products and they get better. So where does that leave us? This is very long, but I don't want to get into it. Are we confident about security model? I think that the security model in Linux is still all over the place. It is all over the place for desktop. It's all over the place for everything else. Everybody's doing the same thing. Red Hat is going in one direction. Canonical is going in their direction. And this all takes us in a very weird place. In KDE, we've made a very, very, very big effort in ABIs and keeping ABIs stable. I am increasingly thinking that this was maybe an error, or it's slowly becoming well, less useful in any case. So my takeaways on this topic are we'll win if our products are easy to use. It is when we do it, because like we can do things like the pen phone and like going into like new tablets and new products, and everything is amazing. Collaborating is useful. I don't think I need to sell you that idea. And only abstracting what is needed to abstract is also useful and important. And important for our products, like we need to sit on tools that are powerful enough, and a way to make sure that things are powerful enough is to see that other people are also doing powerful things with it. We need to have a plan for I don't know what I wanted to say here, and yeah, we need to be able to move into different form factors and platforms. Like maybe something to think is like, do we really need to think change anything about who we are? Probably not. Like we've been serving maybe just different lords, but in practice what we're talking about is doing an operating system of our own. We're talking about like these hardware vendors a lot. We're talking about when we do apps, while doing entirely the same thing but with the different new formats. So probably it's a good moment that we start thinking in this more embedded and aggressive way of like, the important thing is that what we deliver works, and just enjoy being used by people who is that matters, right? Now, I think there's still some time for questions. Then
So one thing that I have seen being in companies is they somehow believe their magic patch is super important and they don't want to contribute it back. Like this bug fix they did, which is like 2 lines, is like they want to keep it forever, right? Which is nonsense. I know it's nonsense. You know it's nonsense. And I don't know if we could have some page or something explaining what you said, right? It's better if you contribute the patch. We're going to be all happier. You're going to have a nicer time updating later. I know I've had this feeling that some of the companies don't buy your what you're selling.
I guess that one of the important parts here is to make sure that people who are working on the companies understand themselves what the advantages of open source are. When you are in a company, you do that, and in the end, like they all need to release it because we're LGPL, right? So when this goes in the open, you can always decide also to integrate a change from a third party, because we don't have CLAs and things like that. So if it's really an improvement, it's also like we can also be proactive there.
Yeah, actually a comment regarding your comment. So one thing, contributing a patch upstream is always a good idea. I fully agree. But if you do that at work, then it means convincing the maintainer that your patch is a good idea, going through reviews, that can take time. And sometimes, well, the company is happy if your 2 lines patch works. It can ship the product and save iterations over days and days and continue with other stuff. That's a practical issue.
Yeah, you're completely right. This is something we were actually discussing with Kayuve the other day, because he was in this same situation. It has been a whole thing in Mercedes as well. How do we make sure that like things go out? I think that first, like making sure that engineers and the people who are in charge understand, because first of all, it's their job, right? Like I don't think anybody has been in the right by saying this patch shouldn't go upstream. And I think that us as engineers, we need to be confident enough to tell our bosses that obviously every situation is different, and well, social problems are social problems, but I think that it's our responsibility, I think, as open source engineers and people who understand what we're doing, to convince them. What we are discussing with Kai as well would be if there's possibilities for doing, for example, from KDE or even from another organization like FSFE or whatever, like having pages or documentation explaining why this is a good idea. There might be value in that, but I don't know. Like if somebody has a great idea of how that would work, that's something we can do. The problem, I guess, it becomes when, or it happens when they start saying, no, it's legal reasons. And then obviously we have to go, yeah, I'm not a lawyer, but this becomes a bit more complex. But I mean, we're all a bit lawyers, so we can all leverage that, I guess. And if not, we need to be friends with lawyers who can have this open mindset, right? You're laughing because I said friends with lawyers? Oh my God. Is there any other question, maybe?
The stream. That's what I'm stream.
So what I have experienced is that contributing a patch upstream is, while it's completely normal for us, it's a completely foreign idea to a lot of normal developers. They don't even, this doesn't come to their mind that they could contribute that upstream to the project. Which, yeah, don't understand, but that's what I see.
I thought it was interesting what you said at the end about maybe Plasma being an embedded product. This is something that has occurred to me as well. To what extent do you think that the customizability and flexibility that we offer in Plasma is ideally targeted at vendors who want to create a customized experience for their users?
I mean, we're already in this discussion, right? Like, if we decided to take Harald's proof of concept today and ship it to our users, we will need to come up with solutions for, I don't know, how do you install this weird thing that always appears on your shell, or how do you install new Queen plugins? All of that, like, we're on this game. We need to have good technologies, which is the other side, and that's why I was talking about security model earlier. Like, there's a lot of things that we don't really have good answers for just yet. Like, I remember talking with Valve years ago, and they were talking about how, what happens if this application wants to put a menu over there and stuff, and you simply cannot do that right now on Wayland. We need to find ways, and I think that part of the solution here is also ourselves. Like, in the recent years, was also trying to like squeeze a lot the things we let the third-party applications to do. I think that we need to like unsqueeze a little bit, because we need to make sure that like we support the world, that the world can use our technology and do everything they want to do. And I think that this is part of the discussion there, but it's entirely a social thing, like saying we need to implement this protocol and this other protocol, and then everybody can do the things they were using. And like the switch to, for example, to Wayland, the switch to container, the switch to an immutable operating system, they become non-question, and we can actually focus on like actually starting to deliver products that are useful for everyone. Like, for example, to make sure that we can offer an operating system to our hardware vendors and know that it will, well, not break, like Harald was saying, when they upgrade and all of that. Like, this needs to be our stepping stone, because otherwise we cannot be always saying we're better, people should be using us, but having this small asterisk of like, unless you're using libc 2023, blah, 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 because everything breaks, right? Like, we need to be able to produce things that we can put on hardware, then get shipped on the other side of the wall, and we know that when they upgrade, when they get a new version, whatever, it won't break. And if it breaks, it's because the laptop exploded, not because we did a typo on our packaging or whatever, right? Also, if the laptop explodes, it's not our fault, which is to be the good side of it, although clearly a tragedy. right? So if there's no more questions and you really like this topic, you can reach out to me and choose whatever hat you want to discuss it under, and I'll be happy to. Thank you very much for listening.